Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us. There's a number of things I'd like to talk about. Some of them are quite concerning to me, and I'd like to move quickly if we could. I grew up on a family farm. We still have that farm in my family. In fact, so does my wife. When I was in the Air Force, there's nothing I enjoyed more than going home and ranching with my brothers. Yeah. We don't have any employees on my farm. Do you believe that OSHA has the ability to step on my family farm and to inspect and regulate what we do there?
There's a congressional rider, Congressman, that says that farming operations that employ 10 or fewer employees, that OSHA is not allowed to undertake enforcement activities on those family farms. So we take that rider very seriously.
Then help me understand, and I know you must be familiar with this from Senator Johans from Nebraska, where there was at least one example, and probably others, well I know of others, where inspectors came on family farms. This one had one employee, and they wrote them up for such things as not having a written plan to control fugitive grain dust, and fined them $130,000. Now, I think that's insane.
Well, I'm happy to give you the context of that. I spent a lot of time in rural Wisconsin. That's where my in-laws have a place, and we go up there a lot, and it's farm country. And one of the challenges is when somebody has their farm, they'll often have their name, but they don't have the number of employees. I've also seen a number of farming operations where they're doing farming, but they're also doing other things because they're very entrepreneurial. And so, for instance, in the case you described in Nebraska, there was a situation there where they had indicated that they were doing things in addition to farming that took them out of the definition of a family farm.
What were they doing and was in addition to farming?
Well, they had my recollection was that they had, they had grain elevators,
grain storage,
and they were doing grain storage that took them beyond the definition of a family farm.
Do you realize that almost every family farm in America has grain storage?
And many of those are family farms, and some of those are beyond the definition and have more than 10 employees. And so when we investigate and learn that they are in fact a family farm, then we back off.
In this case, we didn't.
Well, actually, again, this case was the subject of significant investigation because, again, the employer, when they were typing in what their codes were, indicated that they were doing more than a family farm, and they actually reported that they were a grain facility, and once we moved forward in that case, we were able to resolve it.
So just to be clear, if I have a grain facility on my farm, which we do, on my brothers, we have less than 10 employees, you have no right at all to come on that farm and do an inspection then?
Under those circumstances, that would be correct, sir.
Okay. Thank you for that, and I think that's really important for us to establish that. It'll be interesting to see how this one is resolved.
Well, it's been resolved, sir, the Nebraska case.
And how was it resolved?
There was a settlement in the case, I believe, a few weeks ago, and the fine that you had talked about was withdrawn.
Okay, and do you believe that was an appropriate outcome for that case, I'm sure?
Yes, we're comfortable with settlement.
And then I want to move on, but can you see, and I hope that you can, how that builds resentment and distrust in a case like that for farmers and for other people out there, and to feel like this heavy hand of the government comes in. And you know, this was a terrifying experience for these individuals, I'm sure, facing a $130,000 fine for something which is going on in literally tens of thousands of family farms across the country. But let me move on.
So it's a terrifying experience for parents with whom I've spoken who have lost their children, who've suffocated in grain silos, and that is why we were getting involved, because the incidence of deaths in grain silos, preventable deaths I would note, has been significant, and that's why we've been working collaboratively with farmers and others to prevent that.
Are you indicating then that you think it is appropriate for you to come on family farms with grain silos to investigate them?
Well, again, if there are more than 10, then...
Not talking more than 10. We're talking family farms. You said it's terrifying for parents to lose their children. Heavens, I don't know of anyone who cares about a child like their parents do, certainly more than the government does. We don't need the government to come in and provide that type of oversight for us. And it seems to me you're indicating that that is appropriate.
Well, again, our role is to protect workers. And when we have less than 10 people in a family farm, you have directed us not to be involved there, and we appreciate that, and we respect that, and we will abide by that. At the same time, I think we have a shared interest in farms larger than 10 in preventing deaths. And I've spoken to parents who have had to bury their loved ones, and we're trying to prevent that and trying to do it in a common sense way.
Okay.
Gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Roby.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I think you sense my passion on some of these things and the defense of the family farm and previous questions. I want to kind of get the bigger picture from you if I could and I think illustrate what I think is this conversation is really about. But before I do, let me ask, have you ever been a business owner or worked in the private sector as a business leader?
Have I been? I've been on the boards of nonprofits who have been doing a lot of work in communities, and I speak to business owners every week to make sure I'm informed.
Have you yourself ever been a business owner?
No, I haven't, sir.
Okay. You know, I think this entire hearing is a great example of, I think, the conflict that we're engaged in at this time, and as a society and as a people. And it's this question of what is the proper role of government? How powerful do we want our government to be? How much reach do we want our government to have? And how do we find a balance between what we recognize as a public good, because there's a role in government in regulating some of these industries, and on the other side is liberty and business interest. Again, the family farm, there's nothing more American than a family farm, and I think if you wanted to start a sagebrush rebellion, then advocate that we have OSHA inspectors step onto family farms, true family farms. I have 2 beautiful daughters. I want for them the same thing that you and other members here want. I want them to be treated fairly. I want them to be paid fairly. I don't want them to be harassed. That's not a partisan issue. And I'm afraid sometimes it appears, or the narrative that some would like to create is that it is. I'd like to follow up on Dr. Harris's questions if we could, and that is the new rule for silica, which is quite concerning to me. Just to review very quickly, it used to be the current standard 100 micrograms per cubic meter of air, 250 for a construction industry. The new rule would propose to reduce that to 50 micrograms for all industries. But before a rule like that should be implemented, I think there's 2 criteria, and this is not my estimation. This is, of course, the standard that it would be economically and technically feasible. And I don't know that it would be either one of those, that this new rule would meet that standard. Let me talk about economically very quickly. The government's estimate said it would be $637 million the cost to implement this. If it turned out to be only that cost, it would be the first time in the history of the universe that the government accurately predicted the cost of a new rule or regulation rather than underestimating it. Business puts it at something between even as high as $5.45 billion annually. Let's split the difference and say it's $2.5 billion. Does that seem to be economically feasible as to implement this rule at that kind of cost? And let me follow up with that. The REINS Act, which the Congress has supported, which would allow Congress to have input to any rule that had a greater economic impact than $100 million. Does that seem like a reasonable standard, that something that had greater economic impact than that Congress should have some input to that?
Well, sir, there's been a tremendous amount of input into the rulemaking process in the silica context. We were asked, I think, 2 different occasions to extend it. We acceded to it. We're in the middle of 2 or 3 weeks worth of hearings as we speak, and we're hearing from a wide array of stakeholders, including a number of stakeholders who are providing their views that are very, I think, similar to the views that you're expressing here. As I said before, regardless of whether it's the 503 process, which Governor Ridge described as a very inclusive process, or the silica process, or the process in any other regulatory context, we hear from everyone. We build into the process enough time to make sure that we are making informed judgments, which is why, again, we extended the deadlines in the hearing more than once. And so we'll continue to do that because that's what we need to do. And the rulemaking helps us to make these informed decisions.
Okay, and let me go quickly because I've got the yellow light. I hope you will consider the actual cost of this, which could be billions of dollars, and the impact that's going to have on people who are trying to, as we talked earlier, about getting jobs and creating jobs. The second thing I want to ask you, though, and it's as to its technical feasibility, and that is that there's some indications that even in a laboratory setting, you can't measure accurately 50 parts. And if you can't measure it, how can we possibly enforce a rule that's based on that?
Well, again, we're hearing a lot of different feedback during the rulemaking process. We've heard feedback precisely to the contrary of what you just said, and we are processing all of that feedback in a very methodical way.
Thank you. We continue in round two.